The French Revolution, it was a time of incredible hope, wasn't it? It promised a brand new world built on these big, wonderful ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The idea was that every single person would have rights and be treated as an equal. But did this promise really include everyone? That's the question we're going to explore today. It all started with moments like this one. The storming of the Bastille prison was a huge symbol. It was like the people were shouting that the old ways were over. But you see, breaking down a prison is one thing. Building a brand new society where everyone is truly equal, well, that turned out to be a much longer and more difficult journey, especially for some groups of people. So to understand this whole story, we'll look at it in 5 parts. First, we'll see what the revolution's great promise was all about. Then, we'll look at how women took to the streets. After that, we'll talk about a very special declaration made just for women. Then we'll see the rights they gained for a short time and how they lost them. And finally, we will see how their fight carried on. All right, let's start with our first section. We are going to look closely at the main promise of the revolution. What were its founding ideas? And we have to ask a very important question. Who was actually included in this new dream for society? Now, have a look at this document. This is the famous Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. It was like the foundation stone of the whole revolution. And its very first line said, "Men are born and remain free and equal in rights." Just think about how powerful and exciting those words must have sounded to the people back then. But this brings us to a very crucial question. When the Declaration used the words man and citizen, who did the people who wrote it really mean? Was it supposed to be for every single person? Or were there some unwritten rules, some limits? And the answer is right here in this idea of passive citizens. You see, the new Constitution in 1791 basically created 2 types of citizens. To be an active citizen, the kind who could vote, you had to be a man over 25 years old, and you had to pay a certain amount of taxes. Everyone else, which meant all women and many poor men, they were called passive citizens. And that meant no political rights at all. This table makes the difference between the promise and the reality very clear. On the left side, you have the beautiful idea from the Declaration. All citizens are equal before the law. Simple, right? But now, look at the right side, the reality from the Constitution. Only rich men could vote, and all women were simply classed as passive citizens. This shows us that right from the beginning, the big promise of equality wasn't quite what it seemed. So if women were excluded, how did they react? Did they just stay quiet and accept it? No, not at all. They became some of the revolution's unsung heroes, fighting on the front lines for their families and for the future of France. You see, for most women, especially those from the Third Estate, life was a daily struggle. They worked tough jobs for very low pay, they couldn't get a proper education, and they had to manage the entire household. But one of the biggest problems was the high price of bread. This was the main food for their families, and when they couldn't afford it, that economic pressure pushed them to take action. And this picture shows you exactly what that looked like. Just imagine, you've been standing in a line for hours, waiting for bread, only to find out there's none left for your hungry children. This desperation turned into anger, and angry women would often storm into the bakeries. Their fight for bread was really a fight for their family's survival. And soon, their actions became even bolder. They didn't just stop at bakeries. In October 1789, thousands of women marched all the way to the king's palace at Versailles. They were armed, they were determined, and they confronted the king himself, forcing him to listen to them and return to Paris. This event showed everyone that women were a political force to be reckoned with. This growing activism started a new chapter. The fight was no longer just about bread. Women began to demand political rights. And out of this movement, new, courageous leaders appeared to speak for their cause. Women knew that to be heard, they had to get organized. So, what did they do? They started their own political clubs, about 60 of them all over France. These clubs were places where they could discuss government policies, share their ideas, and demand equal rights. They created their own political spaces where their voices could be heard. And one of the most important and brave voices to emerge from this movement was this woman, Olympe de Gouges. She was a writer and an activist, and she was furious that the new constitution had left women out. She wasn't afraid to challenge the revolutionary government and demand that it live up to its own ideals. She challenged their hypocrisy directly. In 1791, she wrote her own declaration, the Declaration of the Rights of Woman and of the Female Citizen. And just look at its first line. It says, "Woman is born free and remains equal to man in rights." She took their own famous words and turned them right back at them. It was an incredibly bold thing to do. Now, for a brief time, it actually seemed like their voices were making a difference. The government did bring in some new laws that really improved the lives of women. But, as we are about to see, this progress was like taking one step forward and then two giant steps back. Let's look at the positive changes that did happen. For the first time, state schools were created and schooling was made compulsory for all girls. New laws made marriage a contract that you entered into freely, and forced marriages were not allowed. Divorce was made legal for both men and women. Women could even train for jobs, become artists, or run small businesses. This was a time of real positive change. But then, this progress was stopped and brutally reversed. When the revolution entered its most violent phase, known as the Reign of Terror, the government turned against these politically active women. They ordered all the women's clubs to be closed. They banned all political activities by women. Many important women were arrested, and tragically, Olympe de Gouges herself was charged with treason and executed. So even though their immediate goals for political equality were crushed, the struggle of these revolutionary women was not a failure. They left behind a powerful and lasting legacy that would inspire people for many, many years to come. You see, their fight was not forgotten. The memory of their courage, their marches, their clubs, their brave demands for equality, it became an inspiration. Their story was kept alive, and it motivated women's rights movements not only in France, but all around the world. And this timeline really puts their long struggle into perspective. Look at this. Olympe de Gouges made her demand for equal rights in 1791, but it took until 1946, almost 150 years later, for women in France to finally win the right to vote. It just shows that the seeds of an idea planted during the revolution took a very, very long time to grow. And so we end with this final thought. The French Revolution gave the world the wonderful ideals of liberty and equality. But its failure to include women right from the start brings up a very important question for all of us to think about. Can any revolution, anywhere in the world, be truly successful if it leaves half of the people behind?